This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. This is a poor substitute for therapy, but an excellent substitute for other podcasts.
We're not like other podcasts.
Join us as we find the answers to the universe's biggest questions like, is butter a carb? Does crying burn calories? And what the fuck am I doing with my life? We're here to be your part-time therapist, astrologer, concierge doctor, and fairy godmother. Do you need someone to validate you today? Cool. Come on in. We're fine. This is fine. Welcome back, gorgeous listeners. I hope you're having an absolutely fabulous week wherever you are at whatever time you're listening to this. You've made it back to your podcast home, and I'm so happy to have you here. Today, we've got another episode centered on the brain, and this one's pretty intense. Our guest, Brett Stanley from the SmartFit Method, which, as some of you know, is the fancy AI gym I go to, but more on that later. Brett was awake for a 5-hour brain surgery, awake while someone was operating on his brain. He has clearly lived to tell the tale, and tell it he will on today's podcast here in our San Diego studio. All right, Brett, welcome to This Is Fine. Thank you for joining us in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So we start every episode with asking the same question, as you know, since you've listened. Mm-hmm. Are you fine today?
I am fine today.
Fantastic. Are you extra fine because Stella is pawing you right now?
Yeah, that definitely adds to it.
The therapy dog is desperate for attention.
It helps.
Okay, good. So you're feeling good and you're ready to share some stories today.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Some spicy stories. I'm excited about this one in particular. We haven't heard anything like this on the show, so thank you for volunteering something so personal as well.
Of course.
So let's just start with introducing yourself. Our audience hasn't met you yet. Where are you from? What do you do? And how did you end up here in the studio today?
Yeah, so my name is Brett Stanley, and I grew up in Connecticut. Was there until I was about 19 when I switched colleges and moved out here to San Diego, where I've been ever since. It's been about 15 years. And I've been a personal trainer for about 12 years. I recently got a job with a company called the SmartFit Method.
Woo!
And that is actually how we met. So I'm the operations manager of the La Jolla location, and you are one of our ambassadors.
I am one of the ambassadors, and I tell everyone how much I love my quote-unquote robot workout. Mm-hmm. It's not technically a robot workout, but it is, and we've talked about this a little bit on the show before, it is an AI-driven program. There are 3 machines, technically 4. I feel like Big 5 is like broken up into 2 machines.
Yeah,
right?
They're both strength training, but they're separate.
But it's like 3 different workouts, and you do one of those per week, and each of those workouts is 20 minutes, and everything is tracking you at basically every second of your workout, and that's complemented by a biometric body scan. Is that the correct terminology for that? Is it biometrics?
It's a full body scan.
Right? It's like sort of like a DEXA scan, but without the radiation.
Correct. So it uses infrared. So you're not being exposed to the radiation like a DEXA scan. But we do that once every 28 days with our clients. And it does like lean body mass, body fat percentage, as well as a postural analysis and then different circumferences of the body.
Yeah. So you get all these measurements and it's like, oh, I've been doing this for, 6 weeks. And this, there's a 0.5 inch reduction in my waistline or something like that. Or like my biceps are 0.25 inches bigger on both sides. Or there's a bit of a disparity. There's an imbalance. Like one side is a little bigger than the other. Or I'm putting too much pressure in my left foot versus my right foot. These are all things that you can sort of fine tune and tweak that you wouldn't necessarily get in a different kind of workout, in a different kind of gym or environment. So if you are nerdy about those kind of specific details, or you love technology, or you're looking for something that's very, very optimized, you don't have a ton of time, you're a busy parent or a busy individual, or you're just looking to get the most work out of 20 minutes, this is one of the best ways you can do that. I have written about it before on Well and Good, and I will link to that in the description as well if you want to read a little bit more. But I have personally benefited quite a bit from this. I don't even want to call it a workout, this program, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's a method of working out and exercise. To give like the short and sweet plug would be that we're a cellular health and longevity company.
Cute, love.
And we take the latest technology in the fitness industry, a lot of machines that have only been available to high-end athletes or celebrities for the past decade. And we're bringing it all under one roof, combining with personal training to give a safe and effective workout in 3 20-minute sessions a week.
Love it.
Yep.
And I love taking like a slow hour for yoga or Pilates or a nice long walk. and I still enjoy this. So I don't want anyone to think like, oh, well, I actually like taking that whole like time for myself. I won't enjoy this. It's very complimentary, and you do get something that is so effective and transformative in such a short period of time. It's sort of like a concentrated dose. Like you can still like eat a really delicious meal and take a supplement, if that makes sense. And the concentrated dose is going to help you get somewhere a little more quickly, while you can still enjoy like those mental health benefits of like taking that full hour pause to go on a walk or something. So that, I just wanted to plug that as well, because I feel like I've had a little bit of a reaction from some friends like, oh, I actually really like taking that hour to myself. You can do both. Like, why does it have to be one or the other? But if you also are someone who's like, I don't have that hour, I'm so busy, or, you know, I just got a lot going on at this season of my life. Like the 20-minute workout is shockingly brutal. I don't want to scare anyone off, but like the first several times I did the big scary strength training robot one called, it's the Smart 5 and the Smart 3, correct?
Yeah, so it's basically like the 3 to 5 major movements of the body that you're doing.
Yes. So you do leg presses, you do chest presses and pulls.
Yep.
Yes.
Rows and pull downs.
Rows and pull downs. See, this is why we have the trainer here. I don't know these terms. The first few times I did that, I had to sit for another 20 minutes because I was shaking so much. It was crazy how much got done in such a short period of time. The way that my muscles were responding was as if I had just like run a half marathon. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sure you see that a lot.
Oh, definitely. And so what's going on there is we like to say we're extracting the nectar out of the exercise, meaning we're presenting you with this
the concentrate.
Stimulus.
Yeah.
Right. That is what makes you adapt. And so for the strength training aspect, we're using what's called the motor unit recruitment principle, which is basically the longer that a muscle is engaged, the more motor units or muscle fibers that's going to incorporate into that. And so the machines, they move slowly through a range of motion that's preset for each individual. And what happens is each rep, you're engaged for about 14 to 15 seconds. And so when you think of like a normal free weight exercise, like a bench press or a bicep curl, you're really only getting like a second or two of time under tension per rep, whereas here you're getting 14, 15 seconds. And so what's happening is you're recruiting more type 2 muscle fibers, which people don't tend to do because they're not exercising in a way that's engaging the muscles for a prolonged period of time. Usually it's engage and then a slight rest. So when people are done with this, they feel a fatigue that's very unique to, unless someone's specifically training very slowly, which is starting to be seen in the fitness industry.
Yeah.
Especially the eccentric exercise or phase of the workout. So a dynamic motion, meaning a movement, has a concentric phase where the muscle is shortening under tension, and then an eccentric phase where the muscle is elongating under tension. And it turns out that focusing on the eccentric actually has higher hypertrophy output, meaning the muscle tissue growth is going to be more substantial.
You get swole.
Exactly. When really focusing on that eccentric, which a lot of people are just letting gravity kind of take the bar down. You could imagine through a bench press, kind of just let it fall down to the chest, and then they're pressing on the way up.
Right. You think that the move of the exercise is over after you've stretched your arms all the way out, like you're laying on your back and you're doing a bench press, right? So you push that barbell or dumbbell, whatever it is, over your head, and you're like, okay, that's done. Now I can just release back and bend my elbows. But that is half of the exercise that is often neglected, correct?
Exactly. Okay. And then you're also kind of, it's also wasted time. So, it's a very efficient workout program because each second that you're there is basically putting in effort. And yeah, like you said, you're only there for 20 minutes or 1 hour a week, 20 minutes 3 times a week. And so it's going to be a tough 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's a hard 20 minutes, but it's honestly any level can participate. Like he said, the settings are different for each person and AI is involved. So can you explain actually a little bit about how AI works with these machines to adapt to that person's skill level and strength?
Yeah, so one of the machines or modalities that we use is called the Carol. It's an AI bike, and what it does is you get a profile where you input your statistics, height, weight, all that stuff, and then you do calibration rides. So you do some sprints, 2 20-second sprints, and during those sprints, it's calibrating how much force you're generating, and then when you go into the next phase, it adapts the resistance in real time to if you're sprinting or in a recovery phase. So
like what you're ready for that specific day.
exactly. So a lot of other models like the Peloton, that kind of thing, they have a dial where the rider kind of adjusts up or down. This one, you don't have to do that. It adjusts to you in real time as you ride.
Right. And it's adjusting where you actually need to be versus where you want to tell it that you need to be.
Yeah.
So if you're like me and you do have, I just sold it, but if you had a Peloton like me and you're like, okay, this is the range, but I think I'm all the way down here at this end of the range. Well, the AI might say, well, you just did this on Sprint. We think you can do it here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of nice where it does take the guesswork out of it. It does make it a little bit tougher, but again, you're getting the most out of your workout. So that's an excellent example of the AI. Then we haven't talked about this yet. My favorite machine is the Vasper. And this was like a Tony Robbins favorite, right? Or like Dave Asprey, or maybe both.
Both have commented on it. And if I recall correctly, Tony Robbins actually travels with one in a custom-made pod.
Of course he does.
and brings it on his private jet wherever he goes because it's basically like getting a full-body workout.
Yeah, I also do that on my private jet. Yeah, every time I travel.
Of course. It's a necessity.
So the Vasper is using cryotherapy, essentially. It's like cold water. So it's technically not a therapy because you're working out, but it uses this very cold water. Is it 45 degrees?
Yeah, it's just about 45.
I'm like, do I know the stats? Mm-hmm. It's 45 degrees, and it's pumping it into these cuffs around your arms and your legs, your biceps and your thighs, your quads. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the blood flow restriction on top of that. So if you've ever had like your blood pressure taken in the doctor's office, it's sort of like that, where it squeezes around your arms. It's 45 degrees arm, or 45% arm, 65 leg.
Yeah, and it does squeeze like a blood pressure, just a lot less. It's not cutting off the circulation.
Right, yeah, you're not going to feel numb.
Right, when you get your blood pressure done, it actually has to basically cut off the circulation in order to feel the heartbeat.
And you know this because you were an EMT.
Correct,
Yes.
yeah. So
I don't know if we mentioned that.
No, but so definitely having that knowledge has helped in the fitness industry.
Yeah, so you have like a traditional medical background in addition to personal training, and then you have this additional with like the AI woven into it and these very specific optimized machines.
Right. And so what's going on is it's restricting the blood flow and the movement to induce that feeling of workout fatigue. So you imagine if you're doing like a dumbbell curl and your bicep starts to get tired, you feel that quote unquote burning sensation. Mm-hmm. And on this machine, what we're doing is we're inducing that in a controlled manner where you're going to work out the entire time. So the whole 20-minute protocol, you're going to be feeling that workout fatigue, but we can up or down the resistance and the pressure so that you don't have to stop. And what is going on there is we're actually targeting your hormonal production, because that feeling of workout fatigue is a metabolic stress. And a lot of what exercise is basically presenting the body with a stimulus that our body then adapts to or responds to. And the way that we respond to this feeling of workout fatigue as we're working through it is it signals our pituitary gland to increase IGF-1, one of our growth hormones, lower cortisol, our stress hormone, and in turn that raises our testosterone.
So it lowers cortisol?
Yep.
Wow. And are these percentages of like what it's raising or lowering different based on your biological sex?
I'm honestly not too sure how much that plays a role in it. I do know that most of the studies were done with males. So I'm not sure if they have one specifically sex-oriented.
Pretty classic for any kind of sports science study. It's almost always on men.
Right. And actually NASA was one of the cooperators of inventing this machine. So the New Step platform made the machine itself, and then NASA sort of added a couple of components to it. And they use this with astronauts when they re-enter from outer space, because a lot of them have their muscles and other parts of their body have atrophied, but also their hormones are not working properly. And so it allows for a high resistance exercise with minimal impact on the joints.
Right. And this is also a machine that's used for patients who are recovering from cardio or cardiac events.
Yeah, or like spinal injuries.
Right, spinal injury or heart issues. Like they're going through rehabilitation. That's the word I'm looking for. So if you're not an astronaut, but you've been through something traumatic like that, this is also a great machine as well.
Right.
I would love to see SmartFit do some research on female athletes or even just female participants to see if the hormone shifts. Because that's the first thing I thought of. I'm like, oh, it changes your hormones. And I'm like, but for who?
Right. And to go on what you're saying about the cardiac event. So basically the way the company got started, and I'll give my quick little shout outs to everyone in the company. So Rob and Connor Darbrow were the co-founders of Father and Son. And
they're so awesome and sweet, and we love them.
They are so great. Yeah, I'm so happy to be working for them. And Rob, the father, was diagnosed with I'm hoping I'm saying this correctly, an aortic aneurysm, I believe. So in the heart, and he was a professional cyclist. He was training some bodybuilders in his life. And basically when he was told that he really couldn't work out, he kind of started to, go into a bit of a depression, and he realized that, he wasn't getting the proper stimulus he was looking for. So he started to research ways that he could work out again that would be safe for him. He came across this machine, the Vasper, found that it was actually good and safe for him and could actually help improve his condition. And as he was doing that, his son said, hey, you're getting such great success using this. And he was just about to graduate from college and said, hey, can you help me be an entrepreneur and turn this into a method for the general public?
So cool.
And they worked on that together. They brought in some exercise scientists to see what machines and what combination worked best. And this is kind of what they came up with.
The secret recipe.
Exactly. And then so also give a shout out to Mina, my direct boss. She manages all the locations.
We love you, Mina.
She's great. And then to the other trainers that I work with, Ray, Jeshen, and Lewis, they're great. And then the owners of my company are Mark, Jimmy, Colleen, and Shantae.
Big hugs to everyone. I've met every single one of you, and you're all amazing.
They're all great. And if you're ever interested, you can check us out, the Smart Fit Method. And we would love for you to be a part of our little community growing every day.
Come work out with me. All right. So I love that we talked about AI, like workouts of the future, getting this going, and got your background, which I think is really great going into what we're about to talk about, the main course of this episode. Yeah. You have experienced a very rare, very specific, very scary experience that is basically the plot of a movie. Do you want to just get right into it?
Sure. So I had what is called a cavernous angioma. It is a tumor of malformed blood vessels or capillary beds. So basically the end of your circulatory system. Normally those guys are feeding, muscles or some sort of tissue to bring blood in and out. And what happens is, as I was told, about 1% of the population will have these microscopic anomalies that are basically where the capillaries aren't really attached or going to anything. And most people will never know that they have these, and it will never be an issue. A very small percentage of those people, myself being one of them, will have these anomalies proliferate and grow over the course of their life to the point where it starts to become an issue. So basically, they will leak blood into the brain.
Fun.
In an area where it's not supposed to be.
Totally.
And that will cause some issues. So
just a few.
Yeah, and it, kind of depends on where in the brain it happens. For me, mine was located in my right parietal lobe, and it was about the size of a small marble, so like 3 square centimeters about. So the way I found out about it was one night I woke up after having a couple alcoholic drinks, like 3 or 4 beers.
As one does.
Crazy. Yep. I was 27 at the time. And I woke up and I was very hungover, is what I would have described it as, where I had sensitivity to light. I was kind of dry heaving all day. Just overall did not feel great.
Awful, yeah.
And, I was just thinking at the time, this is just me getting older at all of 27 years old, and my hangovers must be getting worse. So I tried to sleep it off all day. The next day I woke up, and when I walked into my living room, my roommate at the time just looked at me and said, Brett, you do not look good. Like, something is up.
Yeah, not even in a mean way. Like, I'm concerned for you.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what happened was it happened to be like a holiday Monday. So I was like, I was thinking about going into a walk-in, but they were all closed. So what I did was I called my nurse's hotline. And so the nurse on the other end is like asking me some questions, and they asked, do you have a headache? And I said, yes. And they said, is it on one particular side? I said, it's on my right side. And they said, is the left side of your body numb? And I looked over and I pinched my left arm and I was like, yeah, it is numb. And they said, you need to go to the hospital immediately.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. Drove myself there. And when I walked in, I kind of told the nurse, like, hey, I think I'm having like an aneurysm or something. And she looked at me kind of like,
for sure.
In disbelief, like, hey, you wouldn't be walking in here if like that was happening.
But you were.
Right. Not technically an aneurysm, but I was having bleeding in my brain.
Right.
So, I explained what was happening. And as I started to say, I got a headache and this side of my body's numb, you could tell the concern on her face was starting to increase. And so they got me in for a CAT scan. Came back and said, hey, you do indeed have some bleeding in your brain. We're going to bring you up to the ICU. Now, this whole time I'm like gradually still getting worse, meaning my symptoms
like
are
physically and mentally.
Right. I'm still getting more and more nauseous. My head is hurting more.
And I imagine panic was setting in at some point.
Yeah, I knew at that point that like something was wrong. I mean, when I woke up that second morning, I was like, and still feeling bad. I was like, okay, this isn't great. And then as soon as my roommate said that, it's like, okay, I can tell something's up.
Yeah.
So over the next couple hours or so, I was still deteriorating, meaning my headache was getting worse. And they were basically prepping me for emergency brain surgery.
Holy shit.
They didn't think it was going to stop on its own. So this
is not like you pause, you schedule a brain surgery for like a week or so from now. This is like you're getting rushed in.
This is like this person's brain is bleeding and it's getting worse.
Yes.
So, and part of it is it hurts a lot. You know, it's one of the worst pains you can have is in what's called a intracerebral hemorrhage.
Right.
And as you're experiencing this pain, it's going to increase your heart rate and blood pressure, which is going to cause this vicious cycle of more bleeding.
More blood,
so really what they were trying to do is basically get my pain under control. So I was getting the good stuff, Dilaudid. And,
Dilaudid will really knock you out. I've had that.
Yep. And so, they called my parents from Florida to have them fly in.
Wow.
They had me fill out a forward directive, which is basically like a last will in case something was going to happen.
That's not going to chill you out.
Right.
Oh, my God.
But luckily, it did end up stop bleeding, like right on the verge of having, they were basically looking for a surgeon. And then I started to get better. So my pain got under control. My heart rate, blood pressure started to go down. I started to feel a little better. Now, at this point, I had digressed to the point where I had lost about 80% of the sensation on the left side of my body, like straight down the middle. And that was because it was in the right side of the brain, which... upon getting an MEG, a magnetic electrogram, this was done a few months later, they basically found that the location of the tumor was on like a trisection of left-sided sensation, which is why I lost all that sensation, left-sided motor control, which I never really had any deficiencies in that.
That's fortunate.
Right. And then language, which was surprisingly the third one.
Is it the Broca's area or like...
Not too sure.
For aphasia. Anyway, I'll look it up later.
Yeah. And that was interesting because there were times where I'd be talking to people and they would tell me I'm not making sense, but I didn't realize I wasn't making sense.
Yeah, it makes sense in your brain.
Exactly.
I can't remember if that's Broca's or Wernicke's. I'm going to look it up while you keep talking.
Cool. Yeah. So that's pretty much how it happened and how I was made aware of what's going on. The recovery from that was basically I spent about 5 days in the ICU.
Wow.
And then I was about a week or so in the regular hospital after that. I went home, and about 3 weeks post-hemorrhage, I woke up at like 3 a.m. in my bed, and the vast majority of the sensation had returned to the left side of my body.
Okay.
Basically what's going on there is that when there's blood in your brain, it's going to be pushing on brain tissue and is going to cause dysfunction. And it takes a long time for your brain to reabsorb that. So over this time, it's slowly, reabsorbing blood.
Because it's like, where is it going to go? Back into your circulatory system.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then so I'm not exactly sure if it reached like a pinnacle moment and maybe like something shifted a little bit. But all of a sudden I woke up and I basically had like an overstimulation going on where like I couldn't fall back asleep. And up until that moment, I couldn't really feel the left side of my face. So like the sensation of like feeling the sheets on my bed with like my hand and feeling my face was kind of kept me up until the next day.
Yeah.
Interesting thing that was going on before that was when I would take showers, the left side of my body wouldn't prune because that's actually a neurological response.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so
that's
a lot
crazy.
of people think it's like, like you're cold or something, but really
I thought it was like osmosis or something, like water was leaving.
Right, and what's going on is your body is attempting to make more surface area because you're slippery, so it's to aid in basically, and
how interesting.
Things.
I never knew that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the bleeding stopped on its own, or that was from surgery?
It stopped on its own, so I didn't actually get surgery at that moment.
Okay, got it.
Right, so there's kind of like
that was super fortunate.
Here. Right.
Yeah, it just like stopped, and you're like, cool, I guess. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right, so then, I recover as best you can, and I was told, here's the deal, you have this thing in your brain, it's about an inch in, so it's not too deep. But there's about a 2% chance per year that it's going to hemorrhage again.
Okay.
So you can either leave it in and take your chances, or you can elect to have a craniotomy and have it removed.
Wow.
And so I decided to do that. And it was interesting because I was also given the choice whether or not to be awake or not.
Okay, let's stop right there.
Okay.
What?
Yeah. So the pros and cons are obviously if you're asleep, you don't have to experience any
Brain
of this.
surgery.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure freak out most people. I was sort of interested in almost the story was part of it. But the other aspect was that it is technically safer to be awake when you can.
Wow.
Because if something goes wrong, you can let the people know. So they can be asking and checking in with you the whole time.
What do you mean if
feeling.
something goes wrong?
Well, for instance, there was a moment where my left arm went numb.
Oh, and you could tell them that. So you can feel things from like the neck down?
Yeah.
Where does sensation stop in this?
Right about the neck.
Okay, so you can't feel anything in like your head?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whoa,
so
that's got to be a trip.
Yeah, you basically get like big shots, like nerve blockers, like in a roundabout fashion, like all around
over
the
your
brain.
head. Holy
and so like everything from then up, can't really feel anything.
Okay.
You also get like, is it local anesthesia or there's another word for it where basically like the whole body
systemic or something.
Numb. Yeah, something like that.
Intravenous anesthesia.
Yeah, so I had that going too. So I was very relaxed.
So you're relaxed. You don't have anesthesia to the point where you're unconscious. You have it to where you're relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the local anesthetics and the nerve blockers in your head. Can you still like talk to tell them? Okay, so you still have like motor control in like your mouth and everything. You just can't feel.
Correct.
So I'm thinking like when you go to the dentist and you're like tripping over your own tongue. Okay, so you can still like communicate, but you are, oh my God, I'm like tripping out on this. You're awake. So they gave you the option. Sorry, let's like go back a little bit. They gave you the option. They laid out the pros and cons. Did they sway your direction?
Yeah, so you know what the main thing was is that when you are awake, you don't have to be put on a ventilator. So when you're completely under, you have to basically have a machine that breathes for you.
Yeah.
And that can actually cause complications later in life because there's a time period where your body is not breathing. And that was the most scary to me, was to think that like a machine was going to be breathing for me.
Yeah, you don't have great options laid out in front of you.
Exactly. So I said, you know what, let's go with the awake thing. You telling me it's safer. I don't want to be put on a ventilator. And I'll get a good story out of it. So here we are.
I love everyone who approaches this. We've had it happen a few times on the show where they're like, well, it was for the story. But I haven't heard to this day someone staying awake during brain surgery for the story. So kudos to you. That's a first on this show.
Yeah.
Okay, so you chose to stay awake.
Mm-hmm.
And then they scheduled it. They got you right in. Like what was that process?
So it scheduled it like about 2 months out, which allowed me to actually go home back to Connecticut.
I would spiral so hard. 2 months.
Yeah, it was a ways out.
Oh my God. Okay, sorry. I just interrupted you. You went home to Connecticut.
And, kind of like saw my friends, let them know what was going on just in case something happened.
Oh
because
God.
I believe they gave me like a 0.5 to 2% chance of like permanent damage or death. So like,
oh my
you might
God.
come out and not be able to talk or something because something could go wrong. And, it's a small percentage, but it's obviously something that you want to take into consideration when you're like, 1 out of 50, 1 out of 200 is going to have something like severely wrong happen.
Yeah.
But the other side of the coin would be, am I going to just have this ticking time bomb in my brain the rest of my life?
Which was also about a 2% chance, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's like, ugh.
Yeah, not great options, but with what I had, I kind of just decided that seemed like the right thing to do.
I feel nauseous even thinking about how I would feel in that position.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't gone through anything close to that experience. What was that like for you emotionally and mentally?
Yeah, so emotionally, it was odd because I knew it was coming and I knew I had like the support of my friends and family. And I think I kind of like psyched myself up into it as best I could. And honestly, it wasn't until like the moment I was going to go in that like everything really like came on. Yeah. So I could give you kind of like a little step-by-step of how the actual process went.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So basically, I go in and my family is out here now. So like the last time before we're like, hey, we're going to get this going, my sister, mom, and dad come in. I kind of like say, see you on the other side, that kind of thing. And then the first thing they do the nerve blockers. And this was funny, but good.
Dang.
Like, so
that's
I
really
out.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Was it here? It was in San Diego, obviously. Was it UCSD?
It was.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, thank God you were in like the Shangri-La of medical care.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at one point I hear him say, and I kind of learned all this after, but basically he goes, I need a number 2 scalpel. And then I hear, That's a number 4 scalpel. I need a number 2 scalpel. That is a number 6 scalpel.
Oh, no.
And in my mind, I'm like, oh, someone's getting fired. Like, can you imagine it's your whole job to just hand
the
someone
correct tool
and they're not doing it properly? And I was like, I found it funny in the moment.
Well, that's good. A little relief.
Right.
Oh, my
right.
God. I would just be thinking, how big is that scalpel?
So that stood out because it was funny. Another aspect was, at one point, he asked for a certain device. I think it was like a clamp or something. He was like, hey, call down to such and such department. We need this. I can't remember what it was. And so now we're like, nothing's happening. And like 30 seconds goes by. And he says, who did you talk to in that department? And the guy's like, or someone's like, oh, I don't know. I just called down and asked for it. And they go, well, you need to call him back because it should be here by now. And then there was like this moment of silence and he goes, do you see what's happening right now?
Oh, God.
Like basically being like, we're sitting here with this person's brain open for an item and it should have been here already.
Yeah, like where's the urgency?
Yeah, so I remember being like, is that the same guy who's handing you the wrong stuff? You know?
Like somebody is getting fired, actually.
Yeah. So that was, unfortunate, but honestly didn't really faze me all that much. It was like, in the grand scheme of things, I was just like, whatever.
Okay, so nothing too traumatic.
Well, the only thing that was traumatic was at one point when they were like in there, like, I'm not sure if they were in the process of cutting it out or still like accessing it, but like, I know at this point, skull is off. They're getting in there, right? And all of a sudden, like, my left arm just went completely numb.
Oh,
like,
shit.
Couldn't move it, couldn't feel it. And I told my neurologist, hey, can't feel the arm anymore.
Yep.
And they were kind of like, hey, Brett, like, we're almost done. Like, we're getting you out. Like, hang in there. And maybe like 20 seconds later, like the feeling came back. So I'm not sure if they like moved some things around or what exactly was happening.
Yeah.
But I did know that they were like in the end phases of it when that happened.
Wow.
So that was good. Oh, so there was this one other thing that the doctor actually, the surgeon actually brought up afterwards because he thought it was funny. He thought it was funny, which was the last time I met him before going into surgery, he was like, so I'm going to be the one doing all of like the major stuff, but there is this guy who's my assistant here. And then at one point during the surgery, I heard the main surgeon telling the other guy like, hey, you need to cut right here. You need to cut here. And I went, Dr. Carter, I was under the impression that you would be doing this part of the surgery. And he just responded very calmly, I am Brett, but it takes 2 people to do this part. And I just went, okay. And he said after, he's like, yeah, he's like, I never had someone question my ethics in the middle of brain surgery.
That sounds on brand after everything I know now.
Yeah. So.
Oh my gosh. So you got through it unscathed. How many hours were you in there?
I believe it was about 5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, they told me to be 5 to 6, but they said it went pretty well.
The fact that it wasn't like just a 5-hour panic attack is a triumph.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think the anesthesia helps quite a bit. And,
for sure.
The prior mental prep. And so, get finished up, get wheeled out. I was in the hospital for less than 48 hours post-surgery.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm actually sitting in my bed and in the hospital, and the nurse comes and is like, hey, like, we think you're ready to go. So we're going to get a wheelchair up here and we're going to get you out. And I was like, all right. And my dad happened to be there with me at the time. And we're sitting and like a half hour goes by and I just look over and I go, I'm getting out of here, Dad. Like, I've had enough.
Bye.
And I just stood up and just walked out of the hospital with these giant sutures down the side of my head.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, I've had enough. I feel good. And that was pretty much it. Now, I did want to circle back to one part, which was when I was still in the ICU from the hemorrhage.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just a moment that really stands out. And this is kind of a thank you to all the nurses and doctors. So I had, some fantastic nurses. I had some not so good nurses. But at one point, I was trying to be very upbeat like the whole time. And this is maybe my 3rd or 4th day in the ICU, and I'm about to go get another cerebral angiogram. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a pretty intense procedure where they put a catheter into your femoral artery up into your brain and take pictures.
Oh.
And this is how they do like the brain mapping.
Yeah.
Because they needed to basically know, and this along with the MEG, the magnetic electrogram, to see like, what is the negative potentials if we do this surgery? Because if the tumor is more towards the left-sided motor control and you have a higher probability of losing motor control on the left side of your body, that's a lot worse than losing sensation.
Sensation, for sure.
So that was part of it. So I'm getting wheeled in for this procedure I know is going to suck.
Mm-hmm.
And
Are you
like,
awake for that too?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
And so I'm like, it's the first time where I started to feel like depressed. Like my mood had changed. I was trying to be all thumbs up the whole time.
There's only so much you can do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now it's been a while. You know, my proverbial adrenaline is pretty much gone at this point. And so the nurse sees me and, you know, this guy had been seeing me every other day for the past 3 days. And now he can see that like my demeanor has changed. And so he starts to wheel me through the ICU and he just leans over and he says in my ear, "You're the only one conscious on this floor, Brett." And it was kind of like one of those realizations where I looked over and I see people with like, you know, basically who are like in a vegetative state.
Oh,
and I'm like, you know what? It could always be worse. You know, at least I'm the best on this floor.
Yeah.
You know, and that was just a really big moment that I like to like mention to people where it's like such a perspective thing.
It is.
That you can get down on yourself, but there's always someone in a worse situation.
That's also a credit to your optimism, I would say, because there could be a type of person or a type of thought pattern that would say, "I'm next," or, "Oh, that could be me," and stay or spiral further down into depression. And I think it really is a credit to your outlook on life to think, "Oh, I have it pretty good in comparison."
Yeah.
Like, it's something to take away about like maybe trying to work on that frame of mind, perspective shift, optimism in general for anyone listening, regardless of your brain surgery status.
Right. And, you know, this may not have been the smartest thing to do looking back, but when they asked me to fill out a forward directive, I actually declined. I was like, I am not dying.
Good
like,
for you.
I am not going to fill this out.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if I do, it's going to be basically like admitting to all these potential negatives.
Just like welcoming that in. I mean, from the manifestation perspective, you did the right thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that worked out. But obviously, looking back, if something happened, it would have been nice to have my affairs in order.
Right.
You know.
I'm sure that like, I mean, I don't even want to like go this direction, but I'm sure like your family could have helped out or, you know, put things together in that instance. I think the most important thing was probably keeping your mindset positive or as positive as possible, given everything you went through.
Right. And it was kind of like a surprise where the person was like, "Hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do a forward directive?" And I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's kind of like a last will." And I was like, "Oh, like,
okay.
I wasn't expecting that."
Yeah, it's sort of like when they have you sign like an NDA or something and you're in the hospital. It's a terrifying perspective, but yeah. Oh my gosh.
So to skip back, like post-surgery, you know, walked out 48 hours, felt pretty good. And I would say maybe like, I remember like 19, 20 days after, I was first time out and about with some friends, went for a walk, went to the beach, and kind of was just like slowly recouping from then on.
Right, like slowly getting back to real life.
Yeah.
Was there anything like, I'm sure there were a ton of things you couldn't do immediately after. I'm guessing exercise was not on the table for a while.
Yeah. I lost a lot of weight. So beforehand, I was probably, I'm about 5'11", and I weighed probably somewhere around like 170, 175. And after I recovered from the hemorrhage, I was like 145 pounds. I lost about 30 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I weighed as much as I did when I was in like 8th grade at that point.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So that was rough, but and like you said, I think it was maybe a month or two before I was allowed to do like very light exercise, and slowly built it back. So now I'm pretty much back to my normal healthy weight. And yeah, that was good.
Wow. Okay. So that was the recovery process. Did you need any other kind of support? I'm just thinking if anyone else is going through a pretty intensive surgery, brain surgery, this is a rare thing, but you know, if anyone's listening to this, thinking about what that experience was like, was there anything else you needed recovery wise besides like, you know, emotional support and time?
Right. Well, I do recall that when I was coming off of the pain medication, it was really tough because I think maybe I had taken it a little too long. I don't think I was like addicted to it, or I definitely wasn't abusing it. I was taking it as prescribed. But I mean, I think it was oxycodone or cotton, whatever one, that's basically synthetic heroin.
Yes.
And I remember...
And they just give it out, truly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm just going to stop taking this because I kind of got to the point where I was like, I need to start making my recovery process. And I was like, you know, basically feeling heroin withdrawals afterwards. And I just remember like feeling terrible and feeling really nauseous again. But,
which is why people end up taking it again. Even if you don't have an addictive personality type or addiction runs in your family or genetics, like those withdrawal symptoms would have someone saying, I don't want to feel that.
Right.
I'll just take another one of these to get through it. And then before you know it, you're taking it all the time.
Yeah,
so that is really good thing to point out, actually. Thank you.
That you can become dependent on it. Yeah, so that was tough. But some of the best advice I got, and shout out to my friend John Shepard. He's been a trauma nurse for like a decade or so.
Wow.
Very smart individual. And I called him when I was in the hospital and was like, hey man, like I'm going through this. What should I do? And he basically said like, the main thing you need to keep in mind is self-advocacy. Like you need to speak up for yourself in the hospital. That most people think there's some eye in the sky that's connecting all the dots for you. And the reality is that there isn't. And you're also not the only patient there. So he says, let's take it this way. Let's say that you're trying to get pain medication. And this actually happened to me at one point where my pain medication wasn't delivered. I was getting it like every hour. And it was maybe 10 minutes late. And on that 9th minute, I was writhing in pain.
Oh,
I'm
God,
talking worst pain of my life, like hitting my elbows on the metal bars because I just like can't sit
Your body
still.
can't hold it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like freaking out.
Yep.
And he goes, well, think of it this way. When you need pain medication, the doctor prescribes it, tells the nurse calls a department where that person tells someone else to fill the prescription, who then hands it off to someone to deliver it to the nurse that then administers it to you. So just to get pain medication, that's moving 5 to 7 different
whole
people.
Circle. Right. Okay.
And every one of those people has more than one patient. And if one of those people doesn't do their job correctly, the first person that's going to find out is you. It's not going to be the person who is waiting to get it because they don't know they're supposed to get it if they're not getting it.
Right.
So basically he said, if something's going wrong, you don't wait to see if someone's going to point it out. You need to make it known.
Right.
Like, hey, I was supposed to get this 3 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Like, this
Push the
needs to
panic
be
button.
here. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that helped me so many times.
Yeah.
Just nurses who were not really like doing their neurological checks correctly, telling the charge nurse, them having someone else come in, made me feel way more comfortable. So best advice I could give is straight out of his mouth, which is you need to be the one who's connecting all the dots. And that's for you or a loved one or a friend, you know, if they can't advise for themselves, someone needs to do it. And unfortunately, that's going to be one of the gaps in our medical system that is very present. And, you know, things happen. We're all human. And especially when there's, you know, multiple individuals involved in a simple task who are also doing multiple other things at the same time, that things can happen. And it's just really important to make sure that you are aware that it's not like someone is just bringing you through the hospital system, that what you say can have a great impact on the level of service and care you're getting.
It's so true. And it's so difficult when you are already so physically and mentally and emotionally compromised. You're in the hospital, you're in pain. And on top of that, on top of everything you're processing, you then also have to be the pilot, right? You have to be in charge, and you have to be basically in charge of all of your own care. You're the director. You have to know what's happening and when, especially if you don't have anyone there with you. It's definitely a challenge, but I think, like you said, if you are going into it with that mindset, with that in mind, with that context, hopefully it will be a little easier, even though it's not an ideal situation. Like in a perfect world, you would go into a hospital and everyone would just be taking care of you. You could turn your brain off.
Right.
You don't really have that luxury. And I don't know if that's, you know, a universal issue, an American issue, like whatever it is. If you're listening, 95% of you are in the US. And if you have an experience like this, we talk a lot about medical advocacy in different ways, but this is one of the ways that you should really try to implement it if you are ever in a position where there are, like Brett said, a lot of dots to connect. If there are instances where you really need a specifically timed medication, pain relief, try to remember that the next time you are in one of these situations, because it's not something you can really learn on the fly.
Right.
It's like you can't teach someone how to give you CPR when you're having a heart attack.
Right. And I think it goes with, you know, it's always better to have a plan than no plan. Even if it's a bad plan, it's better than no plan because at least you can go off of it.
Yeah, think through a little bit. And it's very, very easy to say that when you're like sitting here comfortable in a room and listening to a podcast, whatever it is. And it's much harder when you're in crisis. But if you get it in your brain now, maybe it will come up later when you do need it.
Right.
That's my hope.
And then the other side of that is you need to be nice because, again,
Yes.
the people that you're informing of things that maybe they're not doing correctly are human beings. And people, unfortunately, can have grudges or they can have preferential treatment. And being nice, saying your please and thank yous can go a long way.
Right. And that's, again, hard when you're in so much pain and you're scared, but it's always a good thing to practice.
Right. And it can make a big difference from when a nurse walks in and is happy to see you or is reluctant to help you in any way. And you know, I've heard of people that have had that. And I know that their personalities is, well, were you giving them an attitude kind of thing?
Right.
Because their jobs are hard. You know, it is not an easy gig.
Oh my gosh. Shout out to all my nurse friends listening right now and Brett's. You know, this is one of the most challenging, strenuous, emotionally wringing out the brain and body kind of position to be in. I hear stories almost every day from one of my friends and the difficult things that she goes through and sees. And it's a really hard thing to do day in and day out. And they do it because they care about people. And they're putting their sanity and their lives on the line to help you. Even if you don't feel like you're getting a nice attitude from the jump, the kindness, I think, does go a really long way. I remember just as a kid in the hospital for different reasons, my parents would like buy the nurses in and out. And they always gave us like such kind treatment. And I think it's just, it transcends like hospital visits and nurses. Like that kind of lesson that I learned there was just kindness will get you further. Kindness will get you a little bit extra help when you need it. And like even if you get nothing out of the exchange, it costs nothing to be kind.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't mean for this to sound preachy, but I feel strongly.
Yeah, it's the truth that it can go a long way.
Yeah. So you ended up with brain surgery at 27, which is not on most people's bingo cards for their their 20s. Yep. Did they ever explain to you how this happened, how you ended up with this? Was it pure chance? Was it genetics? Does someone need to go get like a screening right now for, I can't remember what you called it, angioma?
Yeah, cavernous angioma.
Cavernous angioma.
So what can and probably most likely caused mine specifically to proliferate and get larger is I did a lot of contact sports. So I played a lot of football, a lot of lacrosse, just pretty rambunctious individual in general, skateboarding a lot. So all those little, you know, concussive forces can disturb these anomalies. And then when they leak or bleed, that's when they actually tend to get larger, is what I was told. Is that it's like a vicious cycle. So it leaks a little bit, gets a little bigger.
Sort of like exercise. You tear down the muscle, it gets bigger.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
but with concussions.
Now, looking back on things, the first time I can remember drinking like not a lot and having a ridiculous hangover, I was about 22 years old. So looking back, it was about 5 years prior that I had symptoms of this happening. And an interesting thing is when I do my brain imaging, there's probably about a golf ball sized black sphere in my thing, because what happens is when there's blood in your brain, the iron does not get reabsorbed.
So you were talking about that blood reabsorption. You had to wait for the blood to reabsorb.
But because this thing had been hemorrhaging on and off for at least 5 years, there was a leftover staining, they call it, of this black iron.
Wow.
And when they told me about the surgery, they actually said, we're about 90% sure that's what it is. They're like, we believe it's a cavernous angioma. Now, it could be something else. It could be like a cancer. But like in general, from what we're seeing, this is probably what it is. So it's interesting also that they weren't even sure exactly what was going on going in.
Sketch.
And then afterwards, that was one of my first questions, like, so what was it? And you're, it was a cavernous angioma.
It was what we thought.
Yeah. And then another kind of funny aspect was at one point, one of my other neurosurgeons, because the surgeon that I saw was different than the one that I initially had when I was first admitted. And then because he retired when I had checkups, I had a different one. And the last one who I was working with basically said, are you comfortable with me taking your case study to a neurosurgeon convention? Because your cavernous angioma bled in a way that's very rare. And the exact words were, most people's leak, yours exploded. So I had like a very intense hemorrhage, which was rare for that diagnosis.
And was the hemorrhage itself caused by the alcohol?
I believe so.
And it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't an excessive amount of alcohol. You had a few drinks.
Yeah, I think I had 3 or 4 beers. It wasn't like a going out night. It was like, hey, we're hanging out. I'm going to drink a couple beers with some friends.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so what happens is, alcohol thins your blood.
Mm-hmm.
So you become more likely to have a bleeding. Now, I may have had like a minor bump or something. Like I might have
knocked your head
knocked
somehow.
my head on like a cabinet that was open. I don't recall. But they basically said like any sort of like, even just like whipping your head around, like minor whiplash could cause that to happen a little bit.
And so then you start thinking back through like the past decade of your life. Like how many times did I hit my head? How many times did I take ibuprofen? That's a blood thinner.
Right.
Or how many times did I have alcohol? So some signs that if you hadn't hemorrhaged, maybe some signs looking back that would have maybe indicated in retrospect that you had something going on. The first thing I think about is the disproportionate hangover.
Exactly.
Okay, so if someone is experiencing a really severe hangover for not a lot of alcohol, like let's say you have 1 or 2 drinks and you feel like you blacked out on 12 shots of Jack, like maybe that's a time to visit your doctor and not just chalk it up to aging.
Right. If the outcome doesn't match the input, it's definitely a cause for concern. And not to like freak people out if they, have a bad hangover, but it's always better to go get it checked out than find out the way I did. Because if I had known prior, potentially I could have saved the whole hemorrhage aspect and just had the surgery.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't even think about that.
Mm-hmm.
So this was like compounded because of the hemorrhage, which maybe wouldn't have happened. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I'm processing.
And then something else to think of is that I did play a lot of football and I did have a pretty severe concussion when I think I was probably like 13 or so, where I went in and had a CAT scan done. So I had a CAT scan when I was somewhere around early teenager, and sometime between that and when I was 27, had this thing grow.
Okay.
So just because, you're healthy at one point in life doesn't mean that something like this can't turn up within like a decade or so.
Right. It's not like this linear trajectory of health.
Right.
So another thing I guess that brings up is if you have a history of concussions or high impact sports, would be another reason to do regular checkups, perhaps with a neurologist, especially if you have headaches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good kind of standard, if you will, that anytime something with your head is feeling off, it might be a good idea to go get that checked out and just, if for anything, just peace of mind so they can rule out anything that's going to be, life-threatening in the moment.
Yeah, especially if you have insurance, use it. I think a lot of people underutilize their insurance, especially because the healthcare system is not straightforward. It's super complicated. I have insurance and I'm still like on the phone with them like once a week trying to figure things out. It's not fun, but like you were saying, if you can advocate for your care before you get to the hospital, like you don't need anyone to tell you like you have permission. I mean, technically you have to get permission from a GP if you have an HMO, but you don't need permission to go schedule an appointment with a neurologist. If you have a history of concussions, if you've hit your head, if you have headaches, especially if you have headaches, I feel like we write off headaches quite a bit, but they can indicate something bigger or more collective. And if you have these disproportionate hangovers, those are all reasons. I'm not saying everyone listening to this has an angioma or anything wrong with their brain. I just think it's a good idea to be proactive with your health.
Definitely. And if you have cause for concern, it's better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly.
Yep.
Is there anything you would tell younger Brett before you went into all this?
Don't think that you're invincible and don't play off concerns. Don't try and convince yourself that things are okay, especially if it's a repeated thing.
Yeah.
Because it was definitely at least 3 or 4 times looking back I can remember having a very distinct thought of, I am way more hungover than I should be right now.
Right.
And I just kind of convinced myself that things were fine. I think we can be scared to admit that there's something wrong with us.
Totally.
And that's just only going to make things worse in the long run.
Yep.
Like, I could have just simply said, I want to get some peace of mind and make sure that I'm okay. And then a lot of this negative stuff could have been prevented.
Yep. I think that's relatable across the board. Not really paying attention to our symptoms, kind of writing them off, not wanting to think it's a bigger deal, not wanting to get scared, which I understand that too. This isn't to like fearmonger or make you more afraid of your symptoms. But personally, like I don't even trust some of the symptoms. I could be doubled over at like a level 11 pain and be like, I'm probably being a baby. So I relate to that a lot. And I'm definitely trying to practice what I'm preaching right now of really being mindful of your body, tuning into those things and just checking in whenever you can. I think a lot of times, especially in our very tech-driven world, we can be disconnected from our bodies. So this is just a PSA to connect a little bit more and take any kind of symptoms seriously.
Yeah. And, do it for yourself, do it for your friends and family because,
yes,
it's, and if, some people are afraid that it's going to cost them an arm and a leg to go in and get these procedures done, but it's obviously worth it in the long run because it doesn't matter how much money you have. If you're sliding down the scale of health, you're going to want to give as much money as you can to get that back. And so you might as well put up that money up front so that you have peace of mind and so that you can prevent anything that's going to be something that money can't fix.
And I'm not a medical advisor or a financial advisor, but I'm pretty sure in the state of California, you can't go to collections for medical debt. So that's just like some food for thought or Google.
Yeah. And a lot of people also don't know that certain income levels can have the hospitals pay for a large amount. I mean,
Interesting.
Our health field is a little bit of a racket. And so there's a lot of upcharges, paying $100 for a Tylenol, that kind of thing.
The pricing is arbitrary, and you could probably call and just be like, I watched someone do this actually on, it was either TikTok or Instagram. Someone called and said, my bill is $12,000, but I could pay $6,000 right now, in one sum, if you can write off the rest.
I did this.
You did this?
Yep. So
my God.
I walked out with about $20,000 in debt.
Holy shit.
Now, it was $250,000 was how much it cost, but my insurance paid for the vast majority.
Right.
And, I watched a lot of videos on YouTube on how to deal with that kind of debt. And it's exactly what you just said. Call them up and say, I can't spend this amount right now, but I can give you, let's say because there's different departments, hey, I owe you guys $10,000. I can give you $10 a month, or I can give you $1,000 right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say, give me $10, and sometimes they'll say, give me the $1,000.
Yeah, and we'll write off the rest.
Yeah. And if they say, give me the $10, then you just call them back a few months later and say, hey, I'm paying you guys $10 a month right now. I can give you $1,000 right now and pay it up, and
so
just
keep at it.
Checking in.
This is gold.
Yeah. And so I ended up paying only about a third of my total medical expenses.
Good for you.
Yeah.
The fact that it's such a game really does piss me off, but it is what it is right now. This is the system we're working with, and this is really good information.
Yeah. So there's always a way out. And I didn't even go through having the hospitals pay for it, which is another outlet. Mine, some of them went to collections, some of them went to just dealing with the hospitals. And they are willing to take less because you can basically say, either you guys get nothing or you get a portion of this.
Right. Like this letter is going to go to collections, or you can have this chunk of money right now.
Yeah. Or I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy unless you can accept this as a form of payment ongoing.
Dang, this is like a good playbook for anyone going through medical debt. And I think that law is new, the one on not going to collections for medical debt in California.
Yeah, because mine did go to collections.
That's shitty.
And this was, about 8 years ago.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's pretty recent. Don't hold me to that. Please Google it and don't act as if I am God. Brett, this is above and beyond amazing. Thank you so much for sharing not only such a cool story, but incredible information that anyone can learn from and benefit from. So much about optimism and healthcare. We so appreciate you being here and being a listener. We love Smart Fit Method. So thank you for everything.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you want to follow me on social media, my Instagram is The Ninja Shaman. And maybe I can come back one day and we could talk about lucid dreaming and dream interpretation.
We love dreams.
Awesome. Because that's been a little hobby of mine for quite some time. And that's kind of where that name comes from, if you're wondering. But.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask afterward.
Yeah. So
we'll link to that in the description as well. So you can just click on that now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here. It's been great talking. And I had a great time here.
Yay. I'm so glad you joined us today for another episode of This Is Fine. If you're in San Diego, Costa Mesa, or Kauai and interested in trying out the Smart Fit method that we talked about earlier, tell them I sent you, especially if you're in La Jolla, and they'll set you up with a free workout session and a free body scan. And that workout session is going to kick your ass, but it's going to be really, really good. We'd love to hear from you and know what you want to listen to or learn more about next. So drop us a line at imfine@thisisfinepodcast.com. All right, I have to go take Stella for a walk. She won't stop pawing me for attention. I love you all so much, and we'll see you here next week. A bientôt. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of This Is Fine. I've been your host, Dominique Michelle Astorino. We're based in San Diego, recording in studio at DLI Productions in Pacific Beach with Emmy Award-winning sound designer Dan De La Isla. This is a comedy and advice podcast, but for legal reasons, this entire podcast is a joke and none of it is medical advice. To download the transcript or learn more, visit thisisfinepodcast.com.